Our next speaker is Dr. Rick Knabb. He's the Weather Channel's on-air hurricane expert and tropical program manager. He leads hurricane and tropical storm reporting and provides expert, in-depth analysis and updates. Dr. Knabb returned to the Weather Channel in 2007 after serving as the director of the National Hurricane Center between 2012 and 2017. And prior to his first tenure at the National Weather Channel during 2010 and 2012, Dr. Knabb served as the Deputy Director of the Central Pacific Hurricane Center in Honolulu. Before that, he was the Senior Hurricane Specialist and Science Operations Officer at the National Hurricane Center. So please help me welcome Dr. Rick Knabb. We will take questions after the next two speakers, so please hold your questions, but don't forget them.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am so happy to see so many familiar faces, a lot of friendly faces, emergency management, weather service, such a wonderful attendance here, and I think we're going to have a really good conversation this afternoon, and with Brock following me, you can guarantee we're going to have some really good discussion and perspectives. What I'm going to talk about is not all that much about meteorology. I'm going to talk about communication and messaging and talk about how collectively all of us, I think, can get even more on the same page than we already are on what we're saying to the public. And that's ultimately the motivation here, is to do everything we can and do it better to get people ready for the next hurricane. And really, you could apply this to other perils way before the next one hits, because I'm sure a lot of us can think of examples of people who have been through a hurricane and have had not such a good outcome. And we could probably trace it back to something we wish they would have known or wish they would have done way in advance. I'm sure some of you have, either yourself or you've talked to somebody, I know I have talked to people who have gone door to door before a hurricane makes landfall, pleading with people to evacuate, and then finding out that some of those individuals that they talked to after the fact chose not to evacuate and didn't survive. Not because we didn't issue a timely forecast, not because we didn't issue timely evacuation instructions, but because people didn't respond or couldn't respond, whatever the case may be. Some of us have talked to, I know we in television have talked to people who have driven their car onto a water-covered road and barely survived to tell about it. And then hear things like, well, there wasn't a barricade in front of that road, so I thought it would be okay. You know, there's so many things that people do or don't do that we're trying to find solutions for, and would make everything that we do together even more important and successful. Now, I'm not going to suggest, as I'm talking to you today, that better communication, more clear communication, more consistent communication is going to solve all of these problems. In fact, I'm going to touch on a couple things where I think that technological advances or infrastructure advances might be part of the solution. And I realize that I don't have all the answers, but I want to get this conversation going. So it's ultimately motivated by wanting as much as possible on some key things for us to be saying more of the same things. And you know, social scientists have told us that in a variety of situations, when people hear something the first time, they want it confirmed by a reliable opinion, or they want to somehow confirm it themselves. So if I tell somebody to go find out their evacuation zone, and you go tell them to find out their evacuation zone, and we do that consistently, and they hear it more and more, we might be more successful. And there's a lot of people that need to help us do all of this better as well. So let me go on with the slides, and I want to show you an example of what collective messaging and getting on the same page can look like. And this is the Hurricane Strong initiative that the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes has spearheaded. I was involved in some of the early discussions on this, as were a lot of other people. And this is an example of an actual graphic that we've been showing on the air the last couple of years, especially at the beginning parts of hurricane season, but we show it at other times where we break down all of the major aspects of hurricane preparedness in advance into a few key categories, knowing that just about all of these things need to be done way before a hurricane is ever out there, because doing these things is more difficult, more expensive, if not impossible to do when a hurricane is actually out there. Deciding on shelter, knowing your evacuation zone. If you evacuate, how are you going to get there? Where are you going to stay? What are you going to do with your pets? Where do you shelter from wind? What about a mobile home? On and on, deciding on shelter. Buying supplies has become a bigger and bigger issue because there are so many things that people desperately need when a hurricane's coming that they don't get in advance. And we've all heard the stories in past years of people with means driving up in a very nice vehicle to get supplies they would have, should have, could have gotten on their own, whereas there are people who don't have the means ahead of time, can't get those supplies. Insurance is an issue I've been talking a lot more about in recent years because I've come to realize more and more, the more people we talk to after an event, that all the weather disasters and other kinds of disasters that we talk about are also, in many cases, financial disasters for people. And it's often the worst aspect of their recovery, and often completely prevents getting back into one of their homes. So I want to talk about insurance, and that's, again, another one of the major issues that people need to take care of ahead of time. Protecting your home. How do you choose the home that you're going to buy? How do you find out if it's safe? We'll talk about building codes a little bit. And then helping a friend is motivated in part by knowing, for example, that in some of the major hurricane events, especially the storm surge ones, you think of the likes of Katrina and Sandy, where in the storm surge fatalities, disproportionately the people who died were elderly and could have perhaps had a better outcome if we, our society collectively, would take care of our elderly citizens more effectively. And then having a written plan, writing it all down is kind of a way to wrap it all up. Now, that's what we've been showing on the air, and I'll share with you some of the other details of what we've been saying, but this is part of the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes, the nonprofit organization FLASH, their Hurricane Strong program, and you see the same categories of topics down at the bottom. So their website, hurricanestrong.org and flash.org, is a resource for all of us as a way to tap into how to categorize our outreach messaging. And again, this is focused on things we want to be saying well before there's a hurricane out there. These are the things people have got to be doing way before there's ever a hurricane out there. Graphical depictions of what has happened in the past can be pretty effective ways of showing why we need to evacuate for storm surge, but this is the kind of image we hate to see, but we've got to keep showing because I'm sure many of you know the fatalities we had due to storm surge in Mexico Beach. I talked to the police chief there this past June. Many of you maybe have talked to their folks as well. Many of you might be in the room today who have directly dealt with Michael, telling me the stories of how many people were still in town the night before landfall, how many people, still a few dozen, were still in town as the hurricane came ashore, and several of them didn't make it. And I take that example, and it reminds me that we still can, and I don't want this to happen, of course, but even with all of the progress we have all made in forecasting and warning and evacuation decision-making and executing those evacuations, that still, if people don't adhere to those evacuation instructions, and if it's a larger metropolitan area, we can still lose dozens or hundreds of lives in storm surge. And so I think the next biggest hurdle in the storm surge issue is getting more compliance and getting people to plan ahead more so that they're not there when this happens. And we got to keep showing these pictures. And every time I see, this is a picture I took on the ground not long after landfall, And I've talked to some of the residents there, and when you hear what people who went through it say, you identify nuggets. Oh, we got to work on messaging that better. The reasons people give for why they didn't think they needed to evacuate, or why they didn't think they needed flood insurance in the coastal community. There's still a long way to go with what we're saying. These are things that we're saying mostly in real time, but I think a lot of these things can be said way in advance. And not just thinking about whether or not you're in an evacuation zone, but what if you're inland and one of your friends or family members is in an evacuation zone, and making this something that everybody can own, part of the problem. Telling people not to evacuate vertically in a high-rise. We get into these details about evacuation, and these are things we can be saying ahead of time, and we do promote your websites and your evacuation zones. This is a graphic we made up before Michael was coming ashore, and we try to make it famous where people can get their evacuation zone information, and I've been heartened over the last several years to see how much more you all are promoting your evacuation zones. Look what's happening in North Carolina as we head into 2020. New York City has been doing a big campaign on Know Your Zone, and I completely believe that that is critical for people's planning, because and it's the question I always start with when I talk to someone, or I'm talking on the air and I'm talking to people who are new to a coastal area, new to the hurricane problem. I always start with the question, find out first before you do anything else, if you live or where you're thinking of living, if it's in an evacuation zone, because that informs nearly everything else after that. Because if you're in an evacuation zone, then you know something about that house. Oh, that can have storm surge flooding. Oh, maybe I need flood insurance. Oh, now I need to have an evacuation plan. I need to know how my house is built, and you just go from there. And this is definitely a real-time graphic that we show, and it's the kind of detail we're trying to give people. We're not just talking about the meteorology when we've got a storm coming. We want people to know what to do, and we rely heavily on what you all are saying specifically about your community. Rely on what you're saying on social media or through a press release or through a press conference. I wanted to highlight the fact, and I don't know if the folks in back would be able to make it so that we can see. Oh, you can see it. I can't see. I've got this preview monitor where I can't see the email address, but you can, so never mind. That email address is one way for you to send us your information in real time, because one thing we're trying to do is twofold. One, we want to get your evacuation information exactly correct that you want disseminated out there. That can be a challenge, because as opposed to Weather Service forecast and warning information where you see the top examples, in the bottom examples, you see where you get flash flood watch, hurricane warning in the very bottom banner. That's generated automatically from National Weather Service messages that are sent out. We can't do that quite as automatically with emergency management information. Most of the time, that is done manually. We will grab something from something you post on social media, we'll grab it off a press release, we'll listen to what you're saying in a press conference, and then we'll manually generate those messages you see at the bottom from a particular state, a particular county or city, and then produce that on the air. But if you, for example, send it out on Facebook, and you've got the longer character limit on Facebook, and then you send on Twitter a link to that, we can potentially automate slurping that in. But we're trying to get it correct, and in its totality, and exactly the way that you want it sent. And if I could wave a magic wand, someday there would be, however it's done, public products from every emergency management agency in the country, much like you have public products from National Weather Service offices that have the text version of your evacuation and shelter instructions, so that it can be automatically slurped into a system like this. But in the meantime, if you want to make sure that we have the exact text of what you want said on the air or shown on the air, you can send it to that email address, post it in totality on Facebook. And our Steve Wyndham is here from the Weather Channel. Steve is up here. If you want to connect with him and talk about how to accomplish this, we can work with you on that. Bottom line, we want to get it right. Just very briefly, I'm talking a lot about storm surge and saltwater flooding, but the freshwater flooding issue, we all know, is a big, big deal. And we're still losing way too many lives inland. In fact, most of the fatalities in tropical cyclones in recent years has been due to inland flooding, freshwater flooding. And if you look at over the last decade, we've lost about 1,000 people in this country due to flooding. It's been about 100 a year, and we're not too far off that pace this calendar year. And so that problem isn't getting any better. And I am convinced that the Turn Around, Don't Drown campaign has saved a lot of lives. I don't have any doubt about that. But I also know that it's not solving the entire problem. And there are other things that ought to be done. You've probably heard and read sadly about what's happening around the country year after year with hot car deaths, right? We got a phrase to go with that too. Look before you lock, right? But at the same time, there's already quite a bit of effort in the car industry and looking at legal angles and technological angles. How can we notify the driver when there's a child in the back seat? And make it harder. Use technology, use something to keep us as humans from making such horrible decisions and mistakes. And I think that there are opportunities with regards to flood fatalities, especially when you know that about 2/3 of the fatalities in flooding in this country occur in vehicles. And so I think there are a number of things that can be brought to bear. Just talking with some of our Weather Service colleagues, the Water Center and the National Water Model, they can tell you a lot more about what's coming down the pike than I can, but it's coming where we have a better capability in this country to forecast where inundation is going to occur from inland flooding, to enable more, I think it's feasible to have advanced decision making inland like you do at the coast to keep people away from the most flood-prone areas. And for any kind of flooding, when that person is in their vehicle and they're coming up against that decision, they can see the water, maybe they can't. A lot of times at night you just can't see the water on the road. But a lot of times they do see the water and they're up against that decision, turn around, don't drown. I think technology can really be brought to bear to prevent them from ever having to make that decision with more aggressive, more technologically advanced kinds of barricading and stopping people from being able to cross a certain point on the road. Yes, that's logistically difficult. Yes, that's going to take money. But if you imagine how hard it is to get a rental car out of the facility and how hard it is to get anywhere near a stadium and how hard it is to cross, most of the time, railroads. And if you think about 30, 40, 50 years ago, there were a lot more people dying at railroad crossings. And then more and more barricades went up and the fatality rate went down. There are opportunities there. Wouldn't it be cool if somewhere at some operations center in any city around the country, you could have a camera trained on a number of known, mostly vulnerable intersections and low passes that frequently flood a lot. Got a camera on that. You got people watching that. They see the water. They push a button and a barricade goes up. Or you have a gauge that can sense how high the water's getting and barricades automatically go up. I mean, I think there's a combination of messaging and technology and infrastructure to be brought to bear to bring these fatalities down. So we're learning a lot also about what takes people's lives in hurricanes in addition to the forces of the storm. This is a study but our deputy director at the National Hurricane Center, Ed Rappaport, he was working on this study when I was director there, and it has been an incredible source of information to enhance our public messaging on hurricane safety before, during, and after a hurricane. A large number of people succumbing to cardiovascular incidents. We know evacuation is not a completely risk-free activity, and that's why we know and respect the evacuation decisions you make. You don't make them lightly. People getting into car accidents, running into trees that have already fallen, people lighting open flames, whether it's a candle or any other open flame they leave unattended and their house catches on fire. Carbon monoxide poisoning, oh my gosh, we got to work on that one some more. And getting people, when they're buying their generator, to also be getting a lot of information about how to safely operate it. Too many times we're having families wiped out by carbon monoxide poisoning in a power outage. That bottom middle one, that 4%, that's falling in the preparation for or the cleanup from a hurricane. I nearly lost my father that way about 15 years ago, putting up shutters in South Florida, fell off his ladder. Fortunately, when he hit his head on the pavement, it didn't hit hard enough to kill him. But he and I knew that was a close one. And there are just so many things we can be messaging to people way in advance of a hurricane to keep them safer. And the indirect fatalities, as these are called, are almost, over the last few decades, as much as the direct fatalities. So this, I think, can be increasingly a part of our messaging. So here's a graphic, for example, that we've been using on the air when there's any kind of significant power outage problem expected to come or already happening. And we hit this hard. We've got an explainer on carbon monoxide poisoning and really trying to hit this stuff hard, not just focus on the meteorology, how strong are the winds going to be, how high is the water going to be, but how surprisingly dangerous power outages can be. And when we talk about supplies and we talk about generators, that's another opportunity to talk about the safety aspects. And we're talking about in a technologically advanced world what kind of supplies you need. In every hurricane season, I get a table, I put it in the studio, and I lay out all the supplies and show people what they need to get, way ahead of time. Because too many times people are finding themselves in dangerous situations not having some supplies they desperately need. And when I look around at the messaging that's out there around our country from all kinds of sources, it's not all consistent. And it's not all hitting on some of these really important aspects of what people should have on hand, including that we realize that not everybody has the means to stock up ahead of time. We could motivate all kinds of people to donate to aid organizations to get people the supplies they need when they don't have the means to get them themselves. We harp a lot on that. Okay, insurance. I want to get onto this because I want to show you a video clip that we aired on television. We've been hitting on this big time because flood insurance has become an issue that you can talk to the people, anybody at the Weather Channel, ask, all right, give me some inside scoop on Dr. Knabb. What does he talk about it all the time? Well, other than flood insurance, let's see. I'm talking about it all the time. Now, I've successfully convinced several of my coworkers to get flood insurance recently. Okay? Now, so I'm working on it. But we're working on it on television, and it's so disheartening that less than 20% of Americans have flood insurance, renters, owners, when flooding is the most frequent, most expensive, usually the most deadly hazard that we deal with, and it happens all year round, anywhere around the country. So we're hitting hard on this, and I don't see why any of us shouldn't be talking about it, because we're all in the business of trying to protect people from disaster and to get them to recover from disaster, and lack of insurance is a financial disaster. And so this is something we talk about quite a bit. And I've started to change the messaging. I've stopped saying, when you go get your annual insurance checkup, and you are getting an annual insurance checkup, right, Mom? Right, Dad? I do it too. I've stopped telling people to ask your agent if you need flood insurance. I've started telling people, go to your insurance agent and demand flood insurance. Because I've had people tell me that their insurance agent told them they didn't need it. Now, I know that's not the vast majority, but sometimes that's what people hear. Or when they're going to buy a house, their realtor tells them, oh, this place doesn't flood, you don't need flood insurance. So people aren't hearing what they need to hear. So let's watch this clip where we talked about this issue.
Well, Hurricane Florence's legacy in the Carolinas no doubt will be the record-breaking rainfall that flooded parts of the state that have never before flooded. Scenes like this in Lumberton, North Carolina, played out all across the state. And you might remember Lumberton flooded just a couple of years ago from Hurricane Matthew. Well, how about Fayetteville, where the nearby Cape Fear River flowed out of its banks and swamped hundreds of homes and buildings as well. Take a look at this, though, then. Then there's Wilmington, effectively cut off from the rest of the state due to flooded roadways.
Yes, South Carolina also desperate to dry out. So much of the rain that fell in North Carolina eventually finding its way to the ocean via South Carolina. So South Carolina not raining anymore. But, guys, the rivers are still increasing.
It's a lag effect, and so all the drainage that comes from upstream has to go downstream, and those rivers still rising. But take a look at these numbers, Dr. Knabb. I mean, we thought that record-breaking rain was in the realm of possibility. Crushed it.
Yeah, the top rainfall amounts in North Carolina and South Carolina were state records, but it's not just the individual rainfall amounts. It's the footprint of the rainfall amounts exceeding a half a foot or more, and it's the volume of water that has fallen, causing the flash flooding and the river flooding, and we're still getting rivers rising in South Carolina. So it's like Harvey. It's not just a peak rainfall amount. It's how much rain fell over a large area, and this is not the first time in the Carolinas.
Right.
The associated with Joaquin system in South Carolina in 2015, Matthew in 2016, going back to Floyd 99, this keeps happening.
The thing is, we've got a history.
Yeah.
And we've got a storied history, and it's not a good one.
Right. It keeps happening, right? This is a repeating event, yes. And it may make you think that everyone in that area would have flood insurance. But do they? Many are discussing flood insurance and its necessity at this point. This is an ongoing conversation for sure.
It really is. So joining us now live via Skype is Leslie Chapman Henderson with the Federal Alliance for Safe Homes. Leslie, thanks for being with us. You know, we take a look at the numbers there. We know they're tragic. We saw the pictures. They're tragic. There's got to be something we can do as a country. There's something we're doing wrong here. I feel like that we're not getting people the insurance they need or the ability to keep themselves from going into serious financial debt as a result of a flood.
Well, in the traditional way of doing this, the flood policy, as you know, is separate from your homeowner's policy. So the first thing we need to do is make sure people know that. The second thing we need people to do is stop wondering whether or not they need it and just go ahead and get it. Assume you need flood insurance unless you have enough financial savings to rebuild your home and replace your contents without the policy. I think it's always been a question of, do I need it? Well, now we know everybody needs it. Everywhere it can rain, it can flood. And so no one should be without it except in the most, the smallest of circumstances.
Okay. So you get the idea. We're delving into these issues, and I don't see why we all shouldn't be. I mean, I know some of us, our job is to forecast and warn. Some of us, our job is to plan for and call for evacuations, and we have all kinds of other jobs as responders and forecasters. But if we all don't also get on board with adding to all of our outreach material how to avoid financial disaster, I think we're missing an opportunity, right? And then when it comes to, I'm going to very quickly end here with talking about that other tenet of the Hurricane Strong program, and that is making your home stronger. This gets back to the sheltering and what to do to your home way before a hurricane comes, like get the shutters or buy the plywood way ahead of time so you can fit it and test it and all of that. And also, we still see people taping windows. We still have to keep working on that. And these are things we need to be saying way ahead of time. Last thing is on building codes. The Federal Alliance for Safe Homes can talk to you a lot more about this. We've been talking with them and others on the air about the importance of building codes and the importance of people asking questions about how well built is their home that they're about to buy or rent, and not just assume that things are built to some incredibly stringent code, because 2 out of 3 places prone to severe weather don't have the building codes they need. But people tend to believe that the building codes in their community are strong, and they rate the importance of the issue very, very highly. So there's a misconception in the country that wherever you're buying your home, well, certainly there must be some pretty stringent legal minimum requirement of how strong my home is built, and that's important to me, and I'm assuming that's the way it is. And it's not that way everywhere, and we want people to be asking those questions. Here's a public service announcement that I'll end on where we try to get the point across about this.
Okay, 10 seconds, jumpers, you ready? Oh, you might want to tug onto your parachutes one last time. We don't inspect them anymore. Shouldn't be a problem, I think. Okay.
You know what this feels like?
Like there's a Category 5 hurricane coming?
And you're trapped somewhere with an outdated building code.
That is crazy.
Cut. Why would anyone take a leap of faith like that with their home?
Without a building code, you can't be confident your home will protect you in severe weather. No code, no confidence.
Check to see if your community has a strong building code at inspecttoprotect.org.
I'm just glad we didn't do that with a real plane.
Now, I was wearing an actual flight suit. And that backpack was heavy, and we did like 28 takes of that whole thing. So that was heavy. Anyway, so those are the things we're trying to do. And again, to summarize, I think we all can get on board with messaging on some of these key issues on sheltering and evacuation messaging, on supplies, what people should be doing or helping people get, on insurance. We shouldn't be afraid to all talk about insurance, and how to build our homes stronger, and is our home built to a code, and how do we advocate for stronger building codes, and how do we help the less fortunate in our society. So there's a lot more to talk about than meteorology in my world, and I imagine there is in yours as well. So thank you very much.